Welcome back to the show. Dana, you and I back for another. Dana and I didn't see each other. We haven't seen each other for a few weeks because I was on vacation. And so it always feels really, really nice to just get back into the swing, seeing Dana again and, picking up. It's almost like no time goes by.
We're just like sisters, just get right back into it. Yep.
Two peas in a swirling anxiety toilet bowl pod. And for those of you that get that, it's because you heard our other episode.
The last episode. Yeah. The swirl of anxiety where it just keeps flushing and flushing. It's like a running toilet, right?
Yeah, it's like the time, where like the stopper gets stuck, so the water just keeps running.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like it doesn't fall. So
and jiggling the handle doesn't work, and you have to actually find like the thing in the basement that turns the water off to the house. It's the only way to control it. Yeah.
Yeah. That happens. That might happen for Dana and I. Anyway, but so Dana and I were, as psychologists like to do.
Yes.
We like to, I think, split hairs between words because words have meaning.
Yeah, exactly. Try to find the nuance of things. But guilt and shame.
Yeah.
I learned this from a mentor of mine years ago because I think a lot of people think they're the same thing. But that shame is like that toilet thing where you can't turn it off, right? But guilt is I did something wrong, and shame is I am wrong. So guilt is sort of like I feel bad about a behavior that I did, right? Shame is more, it could come after guilt. Like I did something and now I feel like I'm worthless or a bad person for doing that. I certainly heard the phrase shame on you growing up. That was sort of a tactic that most parents use. Shame on you.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And it really was this sort of zip wire to not, it's about just your behavior, but you as a person are bad. Right. And shame is a thing that does a ton of damage. And I think trying to undo shame is sort of pull yourself back up into the guilt thing. And did I really do something wrong that like hurt another person? Is there something about my behavior I want to change? And if not, then you're just down that shame cycle. But we talk a lot about complex trauma on the show, and shame is complex trauma's number one son, right? Just as like right there, they're best friends. And it really is a way that and it's cunning to work with in therapy, right? You and I both know this as therapists. You have to get to those shamed parts, but it's not fun to go there as a client. The feelings are awful. They're very scary, very large. And usually engaging in avoidance is the strategy to keep them at bay, like that we do, right? Mm-hmm. And so to ask someone to willingly walk into that and say, oh, well, let's look at your shame and let's talk about how you feel about this and how awful you feel about yourself. Not just for the sake of like dredging it up, because that would just be like recapitulating trauma. We do that as therapists so that we can reframe it then and say, or reality check and say, you are not bad because of that, right? I think I've told this story in here many, many episodes ago of this Walkman I got for Christmas one year that I loved, took it to the beach. I hung it up on the railing when we were rinsing our feet off after getting off the beach, because of course we couldn't have sand on our feet getting into the car because my dad was insane. We're at the beach. Sand's going to get in the car. Anyway, So I hang this thing up on the railing and realized when I got home that I didn't grab it again. Oh, and I think I was probably like 9 or 10, maybe.
Oh.
And I just got this, you're not careful enough. You don't pay attention. How did you do that? That was so dumb. That would cost so much. You're never getting, it was just this Horrible, horrible. We actually put in a thing in the newspaper a million years ago. You actually used to have lost and found in the newspapers to
Right.
see if
Right.
someone would turn it in. Of course, no one ever did. And those are stories that you remember because that central tenet of it is shame. Like, see, I lose things, I break things, I got this, you're not careful enough. And now I know it's like proprioceptive issues. Not everybody's perfectly coordinated all the time. I don't even have binocular vision, so my depth perception, I'm like, oh, okay. But all those years as a kid hearing all those messages, certainly then I'm the one to rush to, oh, you idiot. If you drop something, you
Yeah.
say in your own mind, oh, I can't believe it did that. How stupid are you? And then you internalize it. So now whoever did that to you doesn't even have to do it to you anymore because now you're doing it to yourself, right?
Yeah.
So shame just gets in there. I always tell clients it like gets in the cracks. It's like liquid and it just permeates into everything. And it takes a lot of years to undo those feelings because you've had a lot of years to accrue those. But my favorite intervention to do with folks, let's say they tell a story from when they're like 4. And I'd say, okay, so do you have any 4-year-olds in your life now? And usually it's like, oh, I have a niece or a nephew or something like that, or maybe their own child. And I say, would you say those things to that kid if they lost something?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, no, oh my God, that'd be terrible. And then I just sort of sit there. And then they're like, oh. So it's sort of like giving the frame of how awful it is what was said to them, but also that like you'd expect a 9-year-old to forget something. In my mind now, I'm like, that should have been my parents' job.
Yeah.
That if I left something and forgot it as a 9-year-old, what the hell were my parents and my 2 sisters? Oh,
Totally.
your Walkman's still there. Let's grab that because it was right there. It's like too much responsibility too early. So there's ways that you then, as a therapist, can dig into those and frame them and give some reality checks. And then, usually for folks that are like, oh yeah, you're right. My God, I was only 4 or whatever it was. And that's what starts to change the narrative. But you have to open those wounds up to clean them out and, let them repair from the inside out. And that's hard work going through it as a client for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This I am bad.
Mhm.
Fundamentally, my self-worth is on the line,
Yeah.
and that's like depression's, automatic treat
Mhm.
feeder. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
it really, these are the internalized narratives
yeah.
that, when I hear my clients say this about themselves, I say to them, where did you hear that from?
Yeah, I'll do that too. Yeah. Does that
Like,
whose
where did
voice is
that
that?
come from?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Whose voice is that?
Yeah.
And much like, I think getting distance and space from
Mhm.
these things, which, in my mind, therapy helps to do, is to
Mhm.
get space in a way where we can observe it versus,
Yeah.
be taken out at the knees by it. Have it be
That's
like the
right.
starfish on our face, kind of thing where
Yeah.
we can't
Yeah.
see anything, right?
Yeah.
How do we manage it? And I see both of those. We've spoken on this podcast about why do we do these things? Like, what is the adaptive reason? Like, how do
Mhm.
we reframe this to get an understanding? How does this make sense, right? And I think
Mhm.
in so many ways, these become protective, weirdly
Yeah.
protective.
Yeah. It's like
We
you
just
get to
don't,
it before someone else does, so you do it to
yeah,
yourself before someone else can. Feels less hurtful that way.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Which
Mhm.
really, when we see it like that, where can we open up?
Mhm. Mhm.
The guilt piece is so interesting because I see my clients use guilt as a penance.
Oh, how so? Can you give an example?
Just as like, okay, so I admit it. I did something that was a mistake,
Mhm. Mhm.
and I'm going to pay for it,
Mm. Mhm.
and I'm going to keep paying for it.
Oh, like whoosh, whoosh,
Right.
there. Yeah.
Self-flagellation,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's so interesting. You were like, yeah, shame can be something that parents use. And as a parent myself, I look back and it's like, ooh, I don't use that very often, but I have. I have, like, oh my
Yeah.
God. I've definitely used, I mean, not nearly as much as, when I
Mm,
was a kid, but like guilt in the Asian
yeah.
culture.
Oh my
Hello. I mean,
God.
and it's not just like the Asian culture, right? There's
Yeah.
lots of ethnicities, lots of
Yes.
cultures, lots
Yeah.
of that use guilt.
Seems like most of them do. It's easier to find the ones that don't than
Yeah.
the ones that do.
I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean,
Yeah.
any of
Well,
you.
look at like Christianity, organized religion, or the idea
Yeah.
of original sin.
Yeah.
You're born having done something wrong just for existing. Like
Yeah.
that's,
Only if you're a
it's
woman. Oh, sorry.
yeah, and worse if you're a
Just
woman,
kidding.
yeah. I mean, what's really interesting though is if you start to study some of this stuff and you look at systems of oppression,
Yeah.
you can have like a parent shaming, you can have a self shaming, sibling shaming, partner, whatever, and then you can get into larger community shame and things like
Yeah.
that hierarchical structures of control in our world that use shaming kinds of things to oppress, right? And to keep people in
Yeah.
line and to keep, there's some of that is you need to keep an organizational structure of society or just be pandemonium. But at what point does it sort of flip over from, uh, that, okay, you did something wrong, you broke that plate because you really weren't paying attention and you
Mhm.
should. And next, let's
Mhm.
have you learn from it. And maybe next time be more mindful
Mhm.
versus, oh God, you horrible POS because you aren't paying attention, you stupid kid, that kind of stuff where it's more about an attack on self, right?
Yeah.
And messages, we get these societally around like body image, for example. It's starting to change now. But my
Yeah.
growing up, no one on TV had more than like 10% body fat in any commercial, any print ad, anything. And so if you didn't ascribe to that norm, there was something wrong with you. So there are ways and other subtle ways that you can be told that you aren't conforming or you're not good enough or you don't measure up or whatever else that is. And these are real systems that are hard to fight, right? uh, and so if you can't change it out here, the only thing you can change, like you said, is what's that voice, where did it come from, who told you that, what purpose might it serve now, or are you just berating yourself, right? I can remember one of the most liberating moments for me in this office, actually, because was a bedroom and I needed more room, so I took the closet out just to make this room bigger for my office. Um, and I was a little bit worried because I hadn't done anything that big construction yet, and I said to my wife, "Well, what if I do it and I don't know how to like fix the drywall and all that?" And she's like, "Then you just call somebody to fix it."
Mm.
That had never occurred to me in a million years. I'm like, no,
You better
if I do it
no,
and
you
I
gotta fix
screw
it
it up,
yourself.
I'm stuck with
You
it.
got
And
yourself into that situation.
now, exactly. And I was like,
Oh.
oh, and I did it. I did it. It wasn't a professional job. I'd never done it before, but I did hire a handyman to come and help.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, you actually did a really good job." He said, "Here you can see where the bubbles are from the tape, but those are easy to fix. Pop them, cut them out, and redo it." And he showed me how to redo it. And he says, "You actually did a really good job for your first time out." And I thought that would be good parenting. If you've never done something before, of course you're not going to do it perfectly.
Right. Right.
Approach it. It's okay. You did a good job. Let's fix this. Let's fix that. I'll show you how. We'll have you try next time. And I wouldn't expect perfection from you. And so she really gave me permission when I'm doing any of those projects like that
Mm.
to actually not have the fear of having to have it perfect from the get go.
Right.
I learned this from other people. I had a art therapy mentor who would say, there are, like, we'd be drawing or something and I would make a mistake, and she says, "There's no mistakes, only creative opportunities." And I'm like, "Oh, blow sunshine up your," like, it just felt like, oh God,
All
how,
right, bunnies and
yeah,
glitter.
where are the crystals hanging down your neck?
Yeah, yeah.
But then I was working with these markers that were like the kind of marker they have to shake. They're almost like paint, and a big
Yeah,
blob
yeah.
came
Oh,
out.
Poscas, yeah.
Yeah, it was these
Yeah.
drawings that I do, these abstract drawings. I'm like, oh my God, it ruined it. She's like, no, no mistakes, only creative opportunities. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to use the blob that's on there then and make something out of it. It turned into something really awesome that I never, ever would have done had that big blob never come out. So then
Mm.
I heard Barb's voice and I'm like, oh my God. And it's sort of like they seem like these subtle things that people say to you or reframe for you, but it
Mm,
changed everything because it gave me permission to not be perfect. It gave me
yeah.
permission to not just make a mistake, but get help if I needed it. That if
Yeah.
it's something I haven't mastered, of course I'm not going to do it right out of the gate, right?
Yeah.
And it's okay to make a mistake because you can turn it into something else, or you can start over. And
Yeah.
practice makes perfect. You do it over again.
No
Um,
waste. Yeah.
yeah,
No
yeah. And there's
waste.
so much terror and fear when it's not guilt. When you did something wrong, like you gave that example, you're kind of like, oh, I know I did something wrong. Then you can hurt yourself around it. Then you are internalizing shame around it. But that shame piece can really terrify you, right? But you have to
Oh,
make
yeah.
friends with it. Yeah, I had another mentor who used to do this thing
Yeah.
in the workshops that we ran. We had a session called Roles and Rules where he talked about like weird thinking patterns that alcoholic family systems have. And so he'd
Mm.
have this puppet, and it would be shame, and he'd say, "You're trying to get rid of it, and it keeps coming back, and it gets bigger. The more you ignore, the bigger it gets." And he'd say, "So you need to turn around and say, hey, who are you?" And Shame's like, "Oh my God, you're looking at me." You have to sort of like make friends with it and say, "I don't want to jettison you because you're an aspect of me, but let's work together because you're in pain, I'm in pain. Let's work together to deal with this." And I still remember that silly little puppet show he used to do because sometimes it just is that reframing of it. You see someone else saying, "Oh, it's not just me that has all those internalized messages. This guy's doing a puppet show about it, so it must actually be like a thing." And everybody
Yeah.
else is sitting there listening to it going, "Oh yeah, I do that too." So you're not
Yeah.
alone in this either. Everybody has certain versions of these, right?
Yeah.
But just catching
Yeah.
yourself so you have the opportunity to face it and deal with it because it doesn't belong to you. Right?
Yeah, I mean, and identifying it. And I really like that we're talking about, there's a difference between guilt and shame,
Mhm.
and that guilt can become shame.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? And so, what are I guess in a way for me, it in my mind, like the loop that gets opened, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
what are the current narratives you have about yourself?
Yeah.
Like, just you know, what are they? And how often do we sit down and say, what are the ways in which how do I think about myself?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
don't know that we necessarily do that. I mean, I know that we do that in therapy,
Mm-hmm.
or good therapy, we do this, right?
Yeah.
But how often does the person out of therapy, which are most people,
That's true. Right.
how often do they sit and think about that?
Yeah. Probably never. Mm-hmm.
Right? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's just one
So
day
it
after another.
perpetuates, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It continues. Yeah.
Yeah. And this
Mm-hmm.
idea of, oh, wow. Like, well, who's the person, Dana, that's like, I hope you make your decisions not out of fear, but out of something else. I don't remember. Like it's
Hmm.
like this quote about just like hoping you make your decisions from this conscious place instead of a
Oh,
place of fear. Right? Because
yeah.
that's not
Yeah.
really a decision then.
That's right. It's just survival at that point.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Are you
Yeah.
just surviving? Are you just
Yeah. Yeah.
surviving?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but shame is so insidious.
Yeah.
It's cunning. So don't shame yourself if you're having a hard time dealing with your shame. You know, getting
Yeah.
some help with it because it's a very hard. Um, it'll move. It'll change shield frequencies to use a Star Trekism. You'll think you have it
Yeah.
down, and then it'll come over here and it'll bite you in the ass, and then you don't even know what's happened. So um, it's tough to deal with. But I find myself sometimes asking myself, is this guilt or shame? And even just asking myself that question, if I can delineate it as not just guilt, then I'm like, ooh, I'm into that stuff that's probably doesn't belong to me. And I want to be more mindful of that so I don't keep doing that. Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. Right, right. And that sometimes we have sources of shame
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
remain in our life.
That's right. Exactly.
You know, that could be family members. We may not live with those family members, but they are still in our
Mhm.
life and we still
Mhm.
have interactions with them, you
Yep.
know, or I don't know. I mean, coworkers, bosses, I don't
Yeah.
know. Like, but
Yeah.
there's not really an option to just say goodbye to them forever, right?
Right. Yeah, you have to deal
Um,
with it. Yeah.
how you deal with it is by knowing that it exists and
Yeah.
by purposefully, consciously
Yeah.
protecting yourself as a choice
Yeah, and sometimes naming it
versus
even internally, like if you
yeah,
know, oh, there it is, it's bullying, it's demeaning, they're shaming me. That automatically means internally for you, the frame is shifted. They may still
yeah,
think that they're shaming you, but you're like, oh, and it'll change everything for you, right?
yeah,
Yeah, it'll
yeah,
empower you that way. And then you don't have to sort of let it in as much. Yeah.
yeah,
DV
yeah,
scenarios, things like that, emotional DV just goes on for years and people feel really powerless, like they can't get away from it. Or the reality is
yeah.
they're not in a safety place yet to get out. And then you have to try to have some resilience in the meantime so you don't take it all in.
I
Yeah.
mean that's a really I mean that could be a whole nother episode in regards
Oh yeah.
to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Is that there, you know, are you ready for this? And
Mhm.
that sometimes you're right. You aren't in
Mhm.
a safe place. So um resilience is the key in that situation, which
Mhm.
you know, my daughter plays a competitive sport and sometimes I'm just like I'm so done with people reframing everything as character building
Yeah.
and resilience um and like being friends with adversity. It's
Yeah.
like yeah, you know, like got it. We're there already. It was just like really funny,
Yeah.
you know, like
Sometimes you lose and it just sucks, right?
yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
sometimes
Yeah.
it just is awful.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
but
That's right.
anyway, but
Oh
all
god.
right, everyone. Well, be good to you. You know, I think we really talk about the real S words, right? Shoulds,
Yeah, I was
shame.
gonna say, don't shit all over yourself. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a good
yeah.
one. Yeah,
So,
yeah,
you know, those are the true S words here. And
yeah.
so just catch those, especially if you're using them against yourself. Anyway.
Yes,
All
exactly.
right, be good to you. We will see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.